financial infrastructure. The value of the network is to create this ability to speak the same language and to create interoperability between the existing financial infrastructure and this new methodology, this new payment layer that creates speed, that creates the lack of the need to rely on the old infrastructure for everything, and creates a lower cost. So I think what blockchain in specific, what blockchain in general and Stellar in specific are solving is this ability for them to be able to transact without having to always speak all of these different languages that exist in different financial infrastructures, so that we can actually sort of be the translator. The network can be the translator for them, and they could engage with folks in all different parts of the globe, even if they don't have the same language with respect to whether it be SEPA or ACH, or the different languages in other parts of the world that they are required to speak to engage with that financial institution. So we announced our partnership with the Ukraine Ministry of Digital Transformation. Together, the Ministry of Digital Transformation and SDF are working to develop a modern virtual asset market infrastructure and enhance Ukraine's status as an innovative digital country in the financial market. In this capacity, SDF was busy during Q1 collaborating closely with the ministry and its national counterparts, as well as large financial institutions in the country, to increase awareness of Stellar and map out our next steps, including a webinar that's scheduled for spring 2021. And lastly, we've been in close collaboration with Franklin Templeton as they've prepared to pilot a tokenization platform on Stellar. They're also planning to run nodes within the scope of their engagement with the network. We're really excited about that.
Currency and blockchain transactions has been secrecy. So what we're seeing in this market is tension between technological advances, more widespread adoption of crypto assets, even among some financial institutions, coming up against regulatory impulses and the need for security and financial sector integrity. So, in the pursuit of answers to these questions, I'm joined today by Dan Doney. He is Chief Executive Officer, co-founder, and lead architect of Securency, a firm that provides security infrastructure and financial logistics for cryptocurrency transactions. Dan is a recognized industry expert in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, dynamic asset pricing, and software development. But his experience comes not just from an avocation for all things blockchain, but from years of experience within the U.S. intelligence establishment. After 9/11, Dan was recruited into the National Security Agency, the NSA, and went on to serve in the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the Defense Intelligence Agency, where he served as Chief Innovation Officer before leaving to launch Securency.
What's going on, y'all? I try to set the stage and try to help you guys understand exactly how important this Protocol 17 upgrade is. You saw the clip with Danelle talking about the goal of Stellar to not replace, but to enhance, to integrate into the existing financial environment. You saw the clip going back to the quarter review where there was discussion about you have the partnership with Ukraine government. You have Franklin Templeton, who is right now putting assets on chain. You had that clip, and then I ended off with another clip talking about Dan Doney. Why did I put that? Well, because Dan Doney, the gentleman with the very impressive resume, participated as one of the authors for this Cap 35 upgrade that you are about to learn some more about. And so I'm excited. I tweeted about it, and I reached out directly to the source. I've got Justin Rice, head of ecosystems with the Stellar Development Foundation. Everybody, please, round of applause.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I'm excited to talk about Protocol 17.
It is, it's one of those very exciting protocol updates that I'm realizing as I talk in the community that a lot of people don't quite understand how significant this is. And so I'm really glad. I'm seeing right now, I got Jeremy Lockhart towards CBDCs. Yes, let's talk about that. You got Baba out there very excited as well. So let's, if you don't mind, I wanted to go straight to the release that you guys put out. And maybe we can start from there with some of the basics, and then we can kind of walk through maybe some of the potential use cases and implications that Protocol 17 would bring. And so let me go ahead and bring that up. And here we are. So let's go here. So it talks about a few times a year. Let's go down here. The major one is the asset clawback. And so recent protocol updates, just to review, you had fee bumps, claimable balance, and sponsored reserves. And those allowed apps to basically handle services and handle account of Lumen requirements a lot easier to make it more user-friendly. Now Protocol 17 is introducing a single new feature that opens up new possibilities. And this is directly related to issuing regulated assets on the Stellar network, okay? So asset clawback. Asset clawback is designed for businesses issuing regulated financial instruments such as money market funds, bonds, and equities to comply with securities regulatory requirements in many jurisdictions. These issuers or their designated transfer agents must demonstrate the ability to revoke assets in certain situations. And this new feature allows them to do that. So that's a lot to kind of sink in there. Justin, go ahead and I guess help us to understand this in a realistic world.
Sure. Stellar is great insofar as it's easy to issue an asset on the Stellar network. And once you do, it's very easy to sort of make payments with that asset or make trades with that asset using this decentralized exchange. And to date, a lot of what SDF has focused on has been assets that represent real-world fiat currencies, stable coins. And the network is very well tuned for those. And a lot of stable coins are currently being issued on the network, and a lot of people are transacting with them, right? So USDC is a prime example. It was issued a few months ago, and increasingly we're seeing more and more payments with USDC. However, like Stellar isn't inherently, it's basically like asset agnostic. You can issue any kind of asset on the network. And there was a need that, as you pointed out, Securrency brought up, to make to sort of add tooling to the network to make it so that you could issue regulated assets, securitized assets. So when you're not issuing fiat currencies or cryptocurrencies, which is what most of the anchors do currently on the network, and instead you want to issue a different class of asset, right? As you pointed out, it's mutual funds, it's bonds, it's equities, could be Reg D assets. In order to do that and comply with regulations and laws in many jurisdictions, you have to be able to prove that your designated transfer agent can claw back part of that balance in certain situations, right? If assets have been fraudulently obtained, if there are regulatory actions that require revocation, or if you can also use it to enable identity-proofed persons to basically recover an asset if they lose custody of, or if their assets are stolen. So this is before you can really issue these kinds of assets, you have to have a proven ability to do this. You have to go to these regulators or lawmakers in your jurisdiction and say, here is my proof that I can take these actions when required. So basically, Protocol 17 adds features to the network that enable these issuers to do that in certain situations, and therefore it makes it possible to issue these assets on the network, whereas before you couldn't really do it. Does that make sense?
Yes. So, what comes to mind, right? What comes to mind is what prompted this sort of discussion? Was there, because I mean, you're saying that this is something that is not a Stellar requirement, that this is a regulatory requirement, right? And so you guys were motivated to go down and speak to speak to regulators and figure out what is needed to get these assets on. Was there a specific corporation, a particular use case that prompted this development? Is there any background that you can share with us on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, let's talk about the process, first of all. The process for making a change to the protocol is that basically anyone can propose a core advancement proposal. These are what they sound like. They are proposals about how to advance the Stellar protocol to add new features. And a lot of the times people at SDF author these changes based on what we're hearing from the ecosystem, but oftentimes it's actually someone else outside of SDF who comes and says, I have an idea for how to extend the network's capabilities. Here's my proposal. And that's what happened in this case. Securrency, which, as you pointed out, is a company that sort of works to provide asset tokenization infrastructure and services to other companies, right? They said, we have some clients that are interested in issuing securitized assets on a blockchain. And if we make these, if we extend the capabilities of Stellar by adding these new features, we can do that on Stellar. So they basically authored this cap that then went through a sort of a normal, there's a process then, right? So they propose a cap, there's a discussion on the Stellar Dev mailing list, it gets discussed in open protocol meetings, and ultimately it goes through various stages before it's accepted and implemented, which is where we are now. And then once it's implemented, it's released in a version of Stellar Core. And then once that version of Stellar Core comes out, all of the validators on the network have to vote to accept it. And that's what's happening on Tuesday. This is also say the process was a specific company that provides services in the ecosystem saw the need, authored the cap, it went through the process, was implemented in a version of Stellar Core, and now we're at the point where the network votes on whether or not to accept it. As far as what drove that need in the first place, Securrency has specific clients that they're working with, and I don't think that they're quite ready to exactly say who those are. I think those are the kinds of things they'll talk about when those assets actually launch on the network. But yeah, they have specific financial institutions that are interested in working with them to issue these kinds of assets on Stellar once this change goes through.
Ooh, y'all heard it. And what's crazy? What's crazy is I remember first meeting Dan in Mexico, Mexico City, back at Meridian, Meridian 2019, and he was actually on a panel talking about securities. I want to say it was Dan. I want to say it was also Franklin Templeton was on that as well. And so for everyone listening, I mean, it shows the amount of work. And this is what I tell people all the time in the communities. I say, you know, what Stellar is doing is not just trying to be a meme token. They're actually trying to make some real world changes. And there's some really heavy hitters that are involved in working hard to make this happen. And so, yeah, Dan was there back in 2019 and possibly before that, before, you know, Meridian, you know, looking at Stellar. And it's taken all this time to finally build up to it. So it's very exciting to kind of see this final piece given. So if you guys have questions, I definitely want to bring you in. I want to bring up Zoe Rios. Zoe had a question here. I know the answer, but I'm going to let you answer it. I've heard XLM is pre-mined. How would this affect holders in the future, taking into account the ups and downs of the market? Kind of a tag along to this, something that I also have to explain a lot to is, does that mean that they can just take my XLM back? So if you can maybe, you know, I know the answer to that, but I want you to go ahead and relieve people's concerns on that concern.
Sure. Well, let's start with that one. Asset clawback cannot be used to take back lumens. And it's not intended to be used on any assets that already exist on the network, right? It is for issuing a new kind of asset on the network, not for applying to existing assets on the network. Specifically, you can't use it for lumens because if you look at the way that the actual thing works, well, let me just say, when an issuer issues an asset that is clawback enabled, in order to do so, they have to have a flag set on their account. So anyone who is interested in holding that asset will look at it and say, this asset is clawback enabled. I understand that before I agree to hold it. And then that holder will create what's called a trust line. And that trust line also has flags enabled on it, right? And so essentially there's an opt-in. I agree to hold an asset that is clawback enabled, and then the issuer can use operations to clawback if and when necessary due to like regulatory to regulatory action. So not only can it not be enabled on any existing asset, so if you hold, you know, USDC or BTC or any asset on the network, it's not like they can just come apply this. It can only be applied to trust lines that have not yet been created, and it can only be applied when the flag is set on the account. And if you step back and think about lumens, well, lumens aren't issued by an account, nor do they have a trust line. So there's actually nowhere you could even technically add these flags that allow the operation to be taken advantage of. But let me just say, the most important thing is this has nothing to do with the assets that are currently on the network or with any assets that you hold currently in your account. It would enable a kind of asset that does not yet exist on the network to be issued. And when you agreed to hold it, you would say, I understand that this asset is clawback enabled. So it's fully opt-in. If you hate the idea of clawback, for instance, if it just rankles you, just don't ever hold one of those assets, you know?
And being that this, you know, from a regulatory standpoint, I mean, what are examples of, you know, I guess common use cases where, you know, this is kind of the norm and expected, and that we'll see, you know, clawbacks initiated?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think it varies from jurisdiction. I know it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction what sort of the laws and regulations are, but I can say that it is like certain kinds of securities that when you issue them, whether you issue them on a blockchain or not, the issuer of those assets, say like you issue some kind of fund, right, a mutual fund, say, in certain jurisdictions and in certain situations, even if you're not issuing it on blockchain, you have to prove to regulators that you have this ability. So as far as like all of the actual kinds of funds and all of their differences and which ones need it, I think, you know, that's a little bit beyond my expertise. But in general, there are certain, like I said, certain kinds of funds that when you issue them, you have to be able to prove to regulators in certain jurisdictions that you have this ability. So this is true, I think, you know, if you hold some of these assets in a brokerage account, a traditional brokerage account. Right. So what they're really trying to do is bring parity to Stellar, right? So now these assets that can exist in the traditional financial world can be represented on the network. And the advantage is kind of goes back to what Danelle was talking about in that overview that you showed, right? Suddenly, instead of these assets that are siloed in brokerage accounts only being available to people who sort of like live who have access to those kinds of accounts, these assets will be available on the Stellar network. So we'll increase access to this infrastructure and allow the representation and sort of allow these assets to take advantage of the interoperability of the network to reach more people.
Absolutely. Shout out Fergal. It's all right, man. You in Ireland. We understand you're late. It's all good. Shout out to Emir representing Stellar Turkey. Appreciate you joining as well. You know, one thing that comes to mind is, when you go back, like you said, to the clip, when we discuss that Stellar is looking to enhance, right? I'm thinking to myself, if Stellar is kind of integrated into the existing banking financial structure, right now, if let's say, for instance, there's I have funds in a mutual account that gets sent to somebody's account inadvertently. It happens. I've had it happen to me over the years, right? Under the current system, there's no way for the institution to do the right thing. The way it's set up right now, you would have to literally call the person up. Hey, can you send that back to me? But, you know, and if you're a financial institution, you're a multi-billion, trillion-dollar company, you can't have that sort of, you know, experience. You want to have a responsible experience. And so I can see, you know, an easy case of it being used right now. I was reading some of this. Go ahead.
Sorry, that's exactly it, right? Is that now those financial institutions, like when you held one of those assets, you know, you would know in advance that it was clawback enabled. What they would use it for is exactly that use case. Whoops, we accidentally made a mistake. We can reverse it by calling back the sort of ill-gotten or the mistaken assets that we sent and sending them to the right person.
Right. Because, I mean, other than that, I mean, I guess if you were to try to do it without this particular protocol update, you'd be looking at some sort of like a complicated multi-sig situation, which in that case, if I'm correct, would essentially give, because with the clawback, they don't have control over your account, but with the multi-sig, they would have control over your account. So I think that's another great point.
Yeah, that's actually, you know, you sort of mentioned that you heard a panel about this at Meridian in 2019. And what's interesting is that this wasn't the first attempt to solve this problem. The first attempt to solve this problem was through an ecosystem proposal. I think it was SEP 8. Sometimes it's quicker to sort of build an ecosystem proposal rather than changing the protocol itself. And the reason why is because when you change the protocol itself, it requires everyone in the ecosystem to upgrade. It has downstream effects on every application. You have to be very, very careful. And so oftentimes it's like, let's see if we can solve this without changing the protocol. So there was a Stellar ecosystem proposal that attempted to sort of give this clawback ability to issuers. But in order to do it, they had to use they had to shoehorn it into a multi-sig solution. And it is exactly what you said. Essentially, okay, you'd have to have an account where the issuer had signing privileges on the account, right? And so they could basically authorize and attempt to, they could essentially have the ability to make payments on behalf of your account. And when they do that, it's not limited to a single asset, right? So this essentially takes that ability and just narrows the focus to a single asset. So you can have an account that holds a bunch of assets and have one that's clawback enabled, and sort of the issuer can take the necessary actions only on that asset, but the rest of your account, all the assets in it are unaffected, right? And so that was part of it. It's like the initial thoughts about how to use multisig were okay, but they just weren't sufficient. And so that's what led Securrency to say, we should try to solve this more at the protocol level, at the most basic level, so that it's like really surgical and does exactly what it needs to do, but no more.
Nice. Shout out to Jay. Man, it is after midnight in Korea, so appreciate you guys checking in and learning about this exciting protocol update. Justin, I think we've pretty much covered it the best that we can. Is there anything that you think I've missed here as far as making sure we explain this accurately?
No, I mean, the one thing I do want to point out is that, as I point out, this is a change to the protocol. It's very surgical. It allows a new kind of asset to be issued that couldn't be issued before. It does not affect existing assets on the network. All that's crucial. The other thing that's crucial right now is that because it's a new protocol change, we're going to be moving the network, leveling up the network from protocol 16 to protocol 17. What that means is that anyone who's building on Stellar does need to make sure to basically like prepare for that upgrade. And the way that you do that is you just ensure that any Stellar related software you're running supports protocol 17. So that means if you run Stellar Core, if you run Horizon, if you have an app that is built using a Stellar SDK, just make sure to install the newest version, because what happens is there will be a new flag, right? Like, so there's a new flag on accounts, clawback enabled. And if you're running an old version of the software and it sees that flag, it won't know what it is, right? It will blow its mind, it will throw an error. And so that's essentially what needs to happen. Everyone needs to basically ensure that anything that they've built, when it sees this new flag or these new operations that take advantage of it, that it recognizes what they are. And so that's a crucial part of what needs to happen right now. And then finally, I do want to just go back to sort of the governance piece, which is that, this idea, which again came from a real ecosystem need that was pointed out by Securrency, and it went through this process of discussion and implementation. It won't hit the network until the network agrees to accept it. And so on Tuesday at 1500 UTC, that's 8 a.m. West Coast time in the US, 11 a.m. East Coast time in the US, the validators are sort of scheduled to vote. And that happens programmatically. They vote using the Stellar Consensus Protocol, just like they vote to ratify transaction sets. And there'll just be a moment when they all, they choose to broadcast the new protocol version. So they'll say, as of this moment, we believe, this validator believes the network should run protocol 17. And if enough validators to reach consensus broadcast that value, then suddenly the network will be running protocol 17. And this feature will be available immediately. It's already available on the testnet if you want to play with it. But
it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
No, as you were talking, is one other thing that came to mind I want to talk to you about. But I think it is important as we kind of end off here is to really highlight what you just said, in that Stellar is decentralized. It's unlike a lot of other systems out there, the SDF is there to support the interest and the ambitions of its members. And so it is exciting when you do see these real world examples of, this is protocol 17 right now. And so you're seeing all these updates that are coming right from the community. You were talking about consensus, and while I had you here, I wanted to ask you one question. one question that I've been seeing coming up lately is some confusion on the difference between, some people, you have proof of work, which is Bitcoin, proof of stake, which, maybe like Cardano, Solana, and then Stellar's consensus protocol. I saw a lot of articles where people were asking those questions, were labeling Stellar as a proof of stake. Could you please maybe briefly explain, how Stellar works from the consensus protocol? If that's something that you can do, I know that I kind of gave you some overtime here, but I just thought it was important since I've seen it pop up a lot lately.
Yeah, explaining the Stellar consensus protocol is not an easy thing to do because it's a process, and so I'll do my best, and I'll try to sort of get into it without getting too far into the weeds. But essentially, sure. Proof of work is kind of like whoever has the biggest computer gets to decide what transactions get added, what block gets added to the chain, right? So you have an incredibly difficult math problem that computers race to solve, and they can only solve it by brute force. And so whoever is willing to put the most energy in solving that problem has the highest chance of winning. So generally, a proof of work is about amassing computing power and using it to verify changes to the ledger. Proof of stake, on the other hand, is about basically how much money you have. Like the more sort of tokens that you have staked behind your validator, the bigger the higher the chance that you get to validate or choose which transactions get added to the network. So it's kind of like proof of work, I've got the biggest computer. Proof of stake, I've got the most money. Stellar, which is a federated Byzantine agreement system, is much more democratic than that. It's a vote. It's a 3-stage vote. So anyone can spin up a validator, and when you do, you essentially choose the other validators that you want to essentially friend, right? So you say, these are the other validators, these are the other organizations, and I just want to make sure that when a transaction comes through, well, first of all the nodes on the network, they get transactions from users, right? Because they're decentralized, and they pool those transactions into a transaction set, and then they check the validity of that transaction set, and if they can agree to the validity, they ratify it and add it to change the state of the ledger, right? Now, in order to do that, a given node, what it does is that it sort of looks to the other nodes that it specifically cares about, nodes that are added to what's called its quorum set, and it says, do, basically two out of 3 of these nodes. I mean, you can set different thresholds, but agree that this is a valid transaction set, and if so, I believe it's valid too, right? So they all check validity, then they sort of ask each other, hey, does this seem cool to you? And if so, a validator will ratify, and if enough validators ratify to sort of close the loop, then the vote goes through, and that happens every 3 to 5 seconds, right? Transaction set gets sort of compiled by all the validators, and then they all look at it, and then they ask the people the nodes that they care about if it looks good. If everybody's in agreement, it gets ratified. And that happens through, so that's sort of at the high level. That voting process is like a 3-stage voting process.
No, but I think, you did it justice, because, to me, the important thing to me when I look at Stellar is that it's the future. You have proof of work is, in my opinion, this is me, not SDF talking here. It's like you said, you have to have the most powerful computer. Proof of stake is about who has the most money. And so, to me, that's still not where we want to go as a community. That's not what blockchain is about. The Stellar consensus is absolutely more open, more democratic, more accessible for everyone and anyone to participate. And I just think that that's just a great way to end this. I hope people understand, all these different things that you guys are doing, because it's exciting, and I believe it's going to have some real world implications. Anthony, what's up? It's on the test net, correct?
Protocol 17 is live on the test net, so you can experiment with it there now. Hopefully, if the vote goes through, it will be live on the public network Tuesday.
All right. So make sure everybody, Anthony B, I know that you have some stuff going on. Make sure you get that upgrade. You put that vote in. And everybody out there, we're going to be making sure that we remind you to update if this voting process goes through successfully, to update your nodes, make sure you're running on the proper protocol so that way you don't have any hiccups. So Justin, thank you so much for joining us today. I will be putting this on Apple, Spotify, so if you missed this or if you missed a part of this, it's going to be not only replaying here on Twitter, but you can also listen on Spotify, Apple, Google, all that fun stuff. So thank you, everybody, for joining in. Thank you, Justin, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks,
Ciao.
Sam. Always a pleasure.